Long before dinosaurs ruled the earth, the world crawled, buzzed, and hissed with monstrous insects of unimaginable size. In the dense, oxygen-rich swamps of prehistory, dragonflies had wings the size of hawks, centipedes stretched longer than crocodiles, and scorpions could drag you beneath the waves. These weren't just oversized bugs, they were apex predators of their time, ruthless, efficient, and terrifyingly alien. Let's step into the ancient world of prehistoric bugs that were giant psychopathic killers, the nightmare creatures that once dominated our planet. It lifts from a fern-darkened canopy like a shadow with a mind, 4 panes of glass catching the carboniferous sun. Air thrums, leaves quiver. The forest, a cathedral of club mosses and horsetails, holds its breath while a hunter the width of your forearm traces the edges of a bog. In that world, thick with humidity, rich with oxygen, the ground spongy with peat that will one day become coal, this is the undisputed master of the sky. It is not a bird. There are no birds yet. It is not quite a modern dragonfly either. It is something older, stranger, a griffin fly, Meganeura. The first thing you would notice is the wings, not just their span, nearly 3/4 of a metre tip to tip, but their latticework of veins, each strut holding shape against turbulent air. Every beat is independent fore and aft, allowing subtle phase shifts that carve invisible vortices along the leading edge. Those spinning tubes of low pressure cling to the membrane and generate lift more efficiently than simple flapping ever could. It banks without banking, leaning on physics long before any physicist arrived to name the trick. The pterostigma, those small dark patches near each wingtip, act like little ballast stones, damping flutter, steadying the glide as it turns from reconnaissance to attack. From a distance the body seems light, but up close you'd see a machine built for ambush. The thorax is all engine. The abdomen, long and flexing like a whip, adjusts the centre of mass mid-flight. The head is mostly eyes, 2 hemispheres of faceted lenses that together create a mosaic of the world. Each ommatidium is a pixel in expanding awareness, tuned to motion, contrasts, flickers. Few things in this forest move without Meganeura noticing. Below those eyes, the mouth parts, heavy and serrated, and a secret basket. When it folds its spiny forelegs in toward the face, the legs form a thorny cage that snaps shut around whatever was unfortunate enough to be cruising past at the wrong moment. A ripple through the sedges betrays a juvenile amphibian surfacing for a breath. The griffinfly drops its altitude, not as a dive bomber, but as a pickpocket with wings. There is no roar, only a sudden acceleration, a tightening of the air, and a blur where a blur wasn't. It doesn't need venom. It doesn't need teeth like a wolf. In an instant, serrated mandibles shear soft flesh. The legs hold fast. The wings never stop beating. Lift, kill, consume, and go. Predation in the Carboniferous is not a contest of drama. It is a contest of who saw whom first, who adjusted course with fewer wasted wing beats, who committed without hesitation. How did a bug become this big? The atmosphere helped. Oxygen levels in these swampy epochs swelled well beyond today's, and insects breathe through a network of fine tubes, tracheae, that deliver oxygen by diffusion rather than by lungs. In a denser, oxygen-rich air, those tubes can supply larger tissues, flight muscles can pull harder, a bigger body can still stay aloft. The sky itself was an ally. So was the lack of airborne rivals. No hawks, no swallows, not even pterosaurs yet. For a time, the path to aerial dominance was open to any creature that could seize it, and Meganeura did. Beneath the water's surface, the story begins earlier. Like its modern cousins, it likely started life as an aquatic predator, a nymph, armoured like a little tank, stalking through the submerged forests of club moss roots. Picture that larva crouched among fronds of giant horsetail, breathing through abdominal gills, the water cloudy with spores and decay. Now watch the mask, an extendable lower lip hinged like a trap jaw, shoot forward with the speed of a spring to snatch a wriggling prey. That labial spear, barbed and bar-like, is the embryonic echo of the adult's efficiency. For years the nymph would wait, strike, feed, shed its skin and grow, each molt a risky gambit balanced against the promise of wings. When the time came, the nymph crept up a reed and split open. An adult unfolded from its own armour, pale and wet as parchment, the wings pumped full with fluid until the veins grew rigid. The first flights were tentative, circles under the canopy, short glides back to the reed. But soon the horizon widened. The bog became a map, and the air a hunting ground arranged in layers. Lo, where damselfly-sized prey rose in glistening clouds. Mid, where juvenile amphibians tested their lungs. High, where the thermal ribbons off the canopy lifted spore dust like snow. In each layer, Meganeura had a tactic. Low, swarm cutting, slice through, snatch, loop, repeat. Mid, shoreline strafes, follow ripples, pivot, collect. High, patrol and intercept, eyes scanning for solitary silhouettes that betray a body larger than a gnat, a payoff worth the energy. Territory mattered. An individual with a good stretch of water and wind would defend it, not with nests or song, but with speed and intimidation. A flash of wings into the face of an intruder, an aerial grapple, a rattle of leg spines, and the interloper peeled off, chastened. The winner returned to his circuit, tracing the same invisible figure eight that had served him well for days. He knew the timing of the afternoon breeze that slid in from the open marsh. He knew when the tiny mayfly hordes lifted like smoke after rain. He knew, in the way animals know without words, that his life was a ledger of calories. Each pursuit must profit, each ascent must pay. There was ritual too. On a warm day when the bog steamed and the canopy buzzed, a pair found each other in the green air and locked into a hovering embrace. A wheel of bodies, tail to thorax, the choreography as old as their lineage. Eggs were laid not at random but with intent, on stems just above the waterline, in beds of damp moss, along the protected edges of floating vegetation, where the next generation would drop straight into a world it already knew how to master. There is a tenderness in this, despite the violence of their days, the quiet persistence of a lineage that refined the craft of flying predation for tens of millions of years. The fossil record preserves flashes of this life like lightning trapped in stone. Wing impressions reveal a venation pattern characteristic of griffinflies, a family apart from true dragonflies but close enough in form to fool a casual eye. The spans are there, measured and remeasured. The wing cells whisper of stiffness and strength. From these patterns, scientists reverse engineer performance. How quickly the wings could tremble at takeoff, how much force they could generate in a gust, how aggressively they could pivot mid-chase. Even the large eyes leave their anonymized signature, expanded head capsules, implied fields of view, a geometry optimized for seeing movement just off-center where targets first appear. To imagine its day is to imagine a world that breathes differently. The air is thick, tasting faintly of rot and resin. Spores gather in sunbeams and drift like pollen storms. Beneath your feet, every step releases the scent of future coal. Tree-sized lycopsids tower, their bark patterned like scales, and broad ferns interlace into shadowed halls where early millipedes commute like armoured trains. Amphibians lurk between root buttresses, heads just above the water, eyes like brass buttons. When Meganeura passes overhead, the surface tenses, ripples push outward and then fall back in as if the pond itself had flinched. Its reign was not eternal. As the ages turned, climates shifted and oxygen levels declined from their lofty peaks. the sky grew less generous to giants. New predators took to the air, first among insects, later among vertebrates. An aerial arms race began to favour smaller, quicker bodies with tighter metabolic control. The lineages that survived shrank, diversified, specialised. The blueprint of the aerial assassin remained, but wielded now by creatures a fraction of the size. The crown passed quietly. No monument marks the last great griffin fly, patrolling its peat-dark kingdom, only stone pages pressed with wings that once made a forest shiver. Yet even today, if you watch a modern dragonfly skim a pond at dusk, you are looking at the living echo of that carboniferous terror. The same compound eyes catch the glint of a gnat. The same spiny legs weld into a net. The same four-wing ballet writes vortices into evening air. Scale reduced, efficiency increased, the design persists. Evolution kept what worked and set aside what could no longer be afforded in a thinner atmosphere crowded with hungry birds. The psychopathy we project is just our word for a life tuned to a single purpose. Detection, interception, consumption, continuation. So imagine standing at the edge of a 320 million year old swamp, ankle deep in a future seam of coal, and hearing nothing, and then a flicker. Something large has edited itself into the scene, and then out of it. A small life that almost was is now fuel for a larger one that will be, at least for another day. The forest exhales. The wing beats fade to a suggestion. Somewhere above, Meganeura redraws its patrol line, untroubled by philosophy, unburdened by pity. It is a solution to a problem the world presented, executed with precision, refined by time and written in stone. It does not sprint so much as flow. A carpet of legs ripples in sequence, 1,000 tiny pushes smearing the leaf litter into a quiet wake. The body is a beam of articulated armour, wide and flat, each segment capped by a glossy plate, each plate stitched to the next with living hinges. In the half-light of the carboniferous understory, the giant moves like a low tide through a forest of giant club moss and horsetail. You could mistake it for a fallen log until the log decides to keep going. People call it a centipede because the word is easy, but the creature is something else, an ancient cousin of millipedes, Arthropleura. The broad-jointed one. Imagine a coffee table that learned to walk. The width alone, a man's shoulders give or take, forces the ferns to part. The length, an easy 2 to 3 meters, redraws paths wherever it roams. Oxygen is high, air is damp, and the world is rich in detritus, conditions that reward an animal that can turn fallen leaves into fuel and mass into momentum. From ground level, the first impression is not fangs or speed, it's engineering. Weight is spread across dozens of paired legs, so no single step punches through the soft peat. Each leg ends in a hooked tip that catches on roots and bark, converting slip into forward progress. The body is flattened, not for aesthetics but for stability, the centre of gravity pressed near the ground, the risk of toppling almost nil. When it climbs a trunk buttress, the front third of the animal lifts as a unit, segment after segment levering up until the head probes the ridge, tests the texture, then pours the rest of the body over the obstacle. In a forest where everything is vertical, trees, reeds, raindrops, this animal makes the horizontal non-negotiable. The head is small for the body, tucked under a shelf of armour, as if reluctant to admit how much command rests in so little space. Antennae sweep in slow arcs, sampling air currents for the sense of rot, fungal bloom or sap. Mandibles knead rather than slide, robust, ridged and set up to grind damp plant matter into something a gut can handle. The meal is never glamorous. It is a wedge of decaying frond loosened from the litter, a mat of moss softened by the last night's rain. A fallen strobilus from a giant club moss punctured and leached of its stored sugars. Bite, crush, pass it back. repeat. Size shifts the forest's behaviour. When Arthropleura enters a clearing, smaller arthropods scatter on habit alone. Reflexive avoidance of shadows. Early amphibians lounging in shallows lift their heads, weighing the odds. The giant is not here to hunt, but its sheer presence rearranges minds. It is a moving terrain feature that does not care what it rolls over. A tiny scorpion makes a show of raising its metasoma. The giant steps past, indifference its own kind of dominance. A dragonfly the size of a hawk flickers by above, assessing a hopeless target and sliding on. For all its quiet, the animal radiates the energy of a creature that never needs to bluff. Moisture is life and law. The plates that protect it do not lock into a scuba suit. There are gaps for movement, channels for flex. Desiccation would be fatal in an afternoon if the air were wrong, so it chooses its routes, always under a canopy, often along the shaded sides of logs, sometimes in the shallow troughs it has made by passing the same way for weeks. On hot days, it retreats into the buttressed caves where tree roots, swollen and braided, weave the air cool. There it waits, still as an altar, while microclimates rise and fall around it. Millipedes today secrete chemical deterrents. This giant likely had its own cocktail. Acrid compounds that make a mouth go numb, eyes water, instincts recalculate. A bite taken in curiosity is a mistake made exactly once. Watch how it turns. The head feels the world left, then right. A rubbery body claws follows the idea, and a wave of leg timing sweeps down the length of it. The outer legs quicken fractionally, the inner legs shorten their strokes, and the whole animal arcs with the casual grace of a boat that knows its river. When it crosses a stream, the legs become probes. They test stones with careful taps, pause when a rock wobbles, seek a better purchase, and only then commit body weight. A misstep here is not a sprained ankle. It is half a ton of exoskeleton and muscle trapped and soaked until a scavenger finds a windfall. Caution is built in at the joint level. Every so often the animal stops. The air carries a new signal, sap gone sour, fungus in bloom, leaves in a slump that says collapse. The head dips and the mouth parts begin their machine work. The noise they make is soft but continuous, like distant rain on wooden planks. Break the detritus, squeeze out the water, grind the fibres, deliver slurry. The gut has length on its side and time on its schedule. In this way, the giant turns forest debris into body in motion and later into soil again. It is not only an eater in its domain, it is one of the engines that make the domain richer with each pass. Molting is the most dangerous chapter in a life like this. Armour does not grow, flesh does. There are days, hours at least, when the fit is too tight for function and the old plates must be abandoned. The giant chooses a hollow, as pivot as the forest allows and anchors itself. The seam along the back begins to split. What emerges is the same animal at a new scale, pale and wet, weighed down by softness where there was once a rampart. The legs find work despite the tremor. The new plates drink air, harden, darken, hold. Predators notice changes in the forest's smell and rhythm. The giant survives by choosing the time and place when noticing won't matter. Reproduction is a story inferred more than known. Modern millipedes lay egg clutches in hidden soil pockets, sometimes guarding, sometimes leaving the future to the chemistry of the earth. It is not hard to imagine this titan arranging a depression under a mat of fern roots, antennae meticulous, placing eggs where their first breath will be damp. The newborns would not be copies in miniature. They would earn their segments by degrees, molting their way into articulation, adding pairs of legs like chapters in a book. Weeks become months, months become years. Growth in a world that provides is slow and certain. Rain transforms the forest into a living drum. When a storm drives in from the ancient sea, trunks shine black-green, and the ground drinks until the mosses float. The giant is in its element then. It moves faster, bolder, surfacing from shelter to roam corridors that yesterday were closed. The sound of its passage under rain is uncanny. The patter on plates, the softened clatter of many feet, the hiss of water sheared by armour edges. Lightning lifts the scene into daylight for a heartbeat, and every surface in sight is articulated. Trees in rings, ferns in fronds, the giant in plates. Thunder rolls off its back and widens the gap it leaves. Accidents happen around it, not to it. A juvenile amphibian misjudges a dash across the trail and meets the underside of a moving ledge. There is a squeak, a flutter, then silence. The giant does not pause. It is not malice. It is physics. All of that mass, all of those legs, all of that evolutionary bet on being large and low, it ends small lives the way a fallen branch ends them. Not as a predator's plan, but as an unavoidable consequence of scale. If it samples the accident, it is curiosity and pragmatism. Most of its calories still come from what the forest builds and drops. There are marks on sandstone far in the future that tell this story without words. Parallel lines from the left row of legs, parallel lines from the right, a width that defies the imagination of anyone who has only ever known insects as small things. In places, the trackway dips and rises with the old substrate, and you can see where the giant pressed down on softer patches and skated lightly across compacted ground. There is no tail drag, no belly groove. The body rode high, controlled, sure. To walk in those tracks today would be to borrow a stride measured in deep time and humidity. As the ages turn and the air thins, oxygen sliding back toward modern levels, the cost of being a giant arthropod rises. New vertebrate predators on land, better adapted to the lower oxygen reality, invent their own solutions to living large. The old bargain, breathe through tubes, cover everything in plates, sprawl the weight across a forest floor that rarely dries, stops penciling out. The lineage contracts and vanishes from the ledger. But while it lasted, Arthropleura was not a myth or a mistake. It was an answer to a wet world, to a rich litterfall, to an atmosphere that allowed bodies to be unreasonable. Stand in that world for a moment and the animal recalibrates your sense of what bug means. The forest is a cathedral, yes, but the aisles are alive and mobile. Pews press themselves forward one plate at a time. You put your hand on the leaf bed and feel the vibration of coordinated feet like distant machinery. The giant approaches, and the ferns on your knuckles bow before it. There is no roar. There is no hiss. There is only a persistent edit to the landscape that keeps happening until it has passed, and the quiet afterward filled with the smell of turned earth and bruised plants. If you read menace in it, that's your story. The animal story is simpler. Go where the food is, stay where the air is wet, keep moving, become the kind of fact that other lives must navigate around. Water the colour of hammered bronze, heavy with silt and pollen, folds around a low shadow that is not current and not driftwood. The river wears a skin of light. Beneath it, the mood is war. On the bottom, ripples of sand climb in tidy staircases. Between them, an armoured body slides, segment after segment following the arithmetic of a predator that knows the path of least resistance. It is not a fish. It is not yet a crab. It is Eurypterid, sea scorpion in name, river scorpion in truth. And this one is the giant, Jacalopterus. The shape is a lesson in levers. A broad carapace forms a shield over the head. From its front edge project the killing tools, massive elbowed chelicerae ending in toothed pincers. Each pincer is a set of interlocking blades studded with denticles that meet like the jaws of a trap. Folded along the sides of walking legs, spined and jointed, suited to crawl as much as to fight. The last pair are different. They flatten into oars. When those paddles sweep back, The whole animal lifts off the bed, weightless enough to glide. When they feather and reset, the body settles again, hugging the substrate with a stealth that belongs to mud and patience. Look into its face and you meet compound eyes set wide on the carapace, two crescents of facets tuned to brightness and motion. Their field is panoramic. Even in this green gloom, each jerking fish is a flicker in a mosaic. Each loom of shadow is a contour map of opportunity and hazard. Between and beneath them, smaller median ocelli, simple eyes, measure the sky's light in a way that keeps the animal oriented when the water turns to ink. Along the edges of its limbs, sensory bristles taste the current. Vibration here is information. Turbulence is handwriting. When a school of spiny-finned fish changes direction as one, the current speaks a sentence that Jacalopterus can read. Its armour is not one slab, but a syllabus of plates. Narrow tergites marching down the pre-abdomen, broader ones across the post-abdomen, each segment braced by internal ridges anchoring muscle. At the end, a telson, long, strong, perhaps keel-like, acts as rudder and threat. One twitch and the body yaws, another and the tail becomes a lance that discourages anything bold enough to come from behind. The whole machine is powered not by lungs but by book gills under the abdominal plates, pages of living tissue fanning water to pluck oxygen from flow. This is a body built to make low-speed decisions and high-speed mistakes rare. The river is not alone. Devonian life crowds every depth. Acanthodian spiny sharks flicker like knives with fins. Placoderm fish with bone masks browse the shallows or patrol the channel. Juvenile sharks move like ideas just beginning to occur to evolution. In this company, the scorpion owns the floor. Head low, paddles tucked, it matches the rippled sand's rhythm so perfectly that the school forgets it. A slash of chelicerae breaks the illusion. One half turn, one lunge, and a fish is in the sawtoothed grip, the pincer closing with a sound only the water hears. The other claw pins, tears, the mouth, hidden until now, processes what the tools deliver. The body barely rises. The river shivers and goes back to work. Most days are not ambush theatre, they are patrol. The giant rows from bank to bank on a circuit it tracks with a map that is not drawn but remembered in muscle. The overhang where the current curls, the gravel bar where small bodies hide, the deep pocket where carcasses lodge after floods. It will scavenge when the calculus says yes. A dead fish is profit without risk. So is the molted skin of a smaller eurypterid, protein still clinging at the cast shell. But when the paddles tilt and the body rises, intent hardens. It can sprint. Those oars become propellers. The plates along the abdomen flex to straighten the body into a dart. Speed here is not a mammal's gallop. It is an arthropod's compress and release, precise, explosive, bounded by water. There is an alternative to sprinting, vanishing. Sand loosens under the scorpion's weight. With slow strokes it fans a shallow trench and lowers itself until only the carapace rim and eye crescents remain proud. Silt settles back like theatre dust after a scene change. Now the river forgets again. A crayfish relative, whatever name the future decides to loan back, trundles into range, antennae busy with small news. A half-second interval, paddles sweep, chelicerae fire, the mud erupts. Predators that hunt by surprise spend more hours prepping a single decision than making it. The strike itself is punctuation. Molting pulls arrogance out of the body. Armour does not give, the animal must. When an old suit of plates tightens to pain, the scorpion chooses the slowest water it knows, wedges itself under a root cradle, and begins to split. A seam opens along the carapace, legs tug and tremble, the paddles fold and then unfurl, new, soft, too light to push, every edge vulnerable. It is a gigantic, pale version of itself, a negative, For hours it is a bag of muscle and hope, testing joints that feel like wet parchment. The river smells opportunity. Fish patrol closer. Smaller eurypterids materialize out of silt like dishonorable cousins. If the giant survives this, the most breakable day of its year, it will be by the math of timing and hiding, and by the chemistry of a new shell, hardening fast enough to turn back teeth. We do not watch the mating dance itself, but trackways and relatives give us a sketch. Horseshoe crabs, kin by deep ancestry, aggregate in the shallows. Their eggs are buried in damp sand where the tide or river edge breathes. Eurypterids leave footprints that start in shallow water and walk onto slick flats, turn and return, as if the business above the waterline were intentional and brief. Imagine two giants in a flooded backwater, a grasp and spiral choreography mediated by those heavy pincers and by the paddles that stabilize and steer. Eggs, if guarded at all, are defended by choice of nest, and by the general truth that a 600-pound suit of armour sitting over your children is a policy. Competition changes a body's mind. Early sharks grow faster, turn tighter, sense electrical whispers that no arthropod can hear. Placoderms invent shearing plates that slice through scale and chitin. On some days the giant owns the channel. On others it can seize the midwater to vertebrates and holds the benthos the way a fortress holds a pass. It does not meet teeth with teeth. It meets them with angles, armour, and the hard limit of what can be grasped by a mouth that must open wide enough to engulf half a metre of problem while not wedging on it. The scorpion's answer is not to be unkillable, it is to be uneconomical to attack. Fossils compress these lives into clues. A quarry in what will be Germany yields a pincer the size of a man's forearm. From that and its tooth rows, paleontologists infer the proportions of a body that would reach 2, perhaps 2.5 metres nose to tail. Micro-wear patterns on the denticles suggest abrasion on hard, wriggling food, not soft carrion alone. Eye facets scaled and counted under a microscope whisper of acuity levels that match an active hunter rather than an ambusher alone. Slabs show entire paddles, oar blades still articulated to limb bases. Trackways are calligraphy in stone, parallel rows of impressions sewn by a central line, where the Telson skimmed, no belly drag, no panic, a controlled, heavy walk across a firm substrate. The river itself is a character with moods that write chapters. After rains, when the water rises tea-dark and quick, the scorpion tucks into eddies behind boulders and lets logs and fish careen past. When drought pulls the channel thin, deep pools concentrate life. There the giant becomes a warden's aur by sheer occupancy. Floodplains spill and retreat, leaving oxbow lakes that trap fish in warm low-oxygen bowls. In those bowls, a book-gilled animal with paddles has an edge, not in vulnerability, but enough. We like to say psychopathic because it tidies our fear into a story about personality. What's here is older and cleaner than human motive. There is only problem-solving in a medium that forgives little. Grip what must be gripped. Row when rowing outperforms crawling. Bury when invisible beats bulletproof. Molt where teeth are few. Feed where energy returns exceed risk over time. That set of rules writes an animal that feels like malice to anything small and edible, and like weather to anything smart enough to stay out of the way. Extinction does not arrive as a single event but as a counting. Environments tilt. Devonian waters falter and rearrange. Oxygen in some basins collapses. Reefs die. Food webs rewire with new nodes occupied by vertebrates that breed fast and learn the water in new ways. The largest eurypterids fade first. Giants are always the last to eat and the first to starve. Their line does not go to zero in a heartbeat. It steps down plate by plate, claw by claw, until the biggest shadow left in the river are fish. The model of the armoured oarsman recedes into smaller bodies that persist for a while, and then, finally, a long while, then not at all. Stand in that Devonian channel and consider the quiet. A heron equivalent has not been invented. No reed hums with dragonflies the size of your hand. Those will come later somewhere else, but the water's surface betrays edits you can't trace to cause. A half moon of ripples moves upstream against the easy flow. A moment later, just a tremor in your calves' skin where it touches the current. A pressure wave you would not notice if you had not already learned to. Something large is moving below in a grammar you do not speak. Then the sand lifts in a pale sigh. The chelicerae bloom like a trap of metal leaves, and there is a violence measured in physics rather than hatred. Foam records it briefly, the current erases the writing. Somewhere down a Var, plates gleam in a slit of sunlight, and the paddles reset for whatever comes next. Night in the cold forest is not dark so much as layered. A canopy of leucopsids braids the stars. Humidity turns breath into a small private cloud. The ground remembers every footfall by holding it a second longer than it should. Something moves that does not make sound the way mammals do. No wet pads, no squeak of tendon. It is weight spread wisely across 8 legs, each tip like a sewing needle taking careful stitches in the soil. Ahead, a pool fringed by horsetail reeds exhales. The watcher, flattened, armoured, coiled, adjusts the angle of an invisible spear at the end of its tail. The scorpion owns this patch of evening. The body is a compromise between fortress and spring. A heavy carapace shields the head, eyes set to the sides like polished seeds, simple and compound, reading brightness and movement more than detail. The pedipalps, massive pincers bearing teeth along their inner edges, rest half open, patient gates. Behind, the mesosoma stacks its plates like a deck of cards. Beneath those plates, book lungs unfold into humid air, each page veined with blood, each page changing water and air into life. This animal breathes the carboniferous like a bellows. The atmosphere is an ally, oxygen higher than what will come later. Nights so wet you can taste the fern sap in your teeth, and call it Pulmona scorpius if you want the name that made it into stone, lung scorpion, a fossil that advertised its respiratory invention by the pits preserved along the belly. In life it is thick through the middle, nearly 2 feet nose to tail before the tail lifts. The tail itself is a motion you could diagram with a compass. 5 segments articulating in a curve, muscles braided in layers, and at the tip an aculeus, the sting, curved like a sickle. The sting does not flash, it negotiates distance. Too soon and it warns, too late and the prey is gone. The math of a good strike is in the shoulder of the tail, in the tiny adjustments that bring the arc into line with the throat. The ground tells more than the air. Along the undersides of the pedipalps and across the body run slits in scylla, microscopic stress detectors that feel the earth's tremors as if the soil had a heartbeat. On the legs, fine hairs called trichobothria tremble at the ghost of a breeze from something that moved a fern 3 steps away. The pectines, comb-like organs dragging the ground beneath the abdomen, taste the chemical news, who crossed here, how recently, whether they were afraid. Sight is a backup system in a forest that runs on touch and smell. When the scorpion lifts its body a fraction, the whole world comes into focus through the soles of its feet. There, a ripple in the shallow, as a juvenile amphibian noses from water to shore. The scorpion is a problem with 2 solutions. Solution 1 is patience, it flattens further, legs parting leaf litter until armour meets damp loam and becomes a contour. The pedipalps lower, the tail finds a near vertical rest that promises speed. Solution 2 is suddenness. Prey in this place either leaps or slides, the ambush must make both wrong. When the amphibian's forelimbs commit to land, sand adheres to its chin. The first movement is not a lunge, but a closing. Pedipalps scissoring in, teeth finding purchase, the gate clamping a wedge of muscle and bone between stone and stone. Panic is motion, and motion is information. To reduce the one, you must reduce the other. The tail strikes cleanly, not as an afterthought, but as the line under a sum already done. What travels down the sting is not a single thing. In modern scorpions, the first droplets can be thin, cheap, provenom, a quick electrical confusion that buys a second or two, followed by a richer cocktail if the fight demands it. Whether Pulmonoscorpius had the same economy is unknown, but the logic holds in a world where energy saved is a meal earned later. Venom here is not an ideology, it is a tool. Against insects with armour, it buys time for the crusher to work. Against soft-bodied juveniles, one well-placed dose keeps the pedipalps from wresting what the scorpion already owns. Feeding begins before certainty is complete. Chelicerae, small pincer-like mouth parts, work like quick hands at a stubborn knot, tearing, macerating, feeding a mouth that prefers its food pre-digested. Enzymes start the work outside, turning tissues into a slurry the gut can drink. A vertebrate struggles differently than a millipede. One bucks, the other coils. The scorpion adjusts grip, shifts a leg to pin a kicking limb, leans the weight of a segment here or there until the argument goes quiet. In a few minutes the night is the same as it was, except for the faint smell of iron and a darker patch of soil under the reeds. Day is not off limits, but it is more expensive. Heat teases water away from soft parts. Light exposes. The scorpion writes its roots in shade. Under the skirts of tree ferns, along the cool sides of buttress roots, through the crowded streets of fallen fronds. On wet mornings it will patrol the forest's edge. Pectines humming over fresh stories, an Arthropleura's broad tread flattening a lane, a smaller scorpion's meander, a centipede's sharp dash, and choose where profit lies. Often the best meal is not the fastest, but the most predictable. Eggs buried shallow by something that thought sand was privacy. A beetle stuck on its back and soaring the air. A carrion windfall with 1,000 small mouths already at work. Scavenging is not shame, it is good arithmetic. The armour that makes the scorpion sovereign makes it anxious when it must be reborn. Molting is an hour when physics turns against design. The old exoskeleton splits. A new pale self heaves through a seam, limbs slipping free, pedipalps catching and releasing their own former sockets, tail segments unfolding like a measuring tape. For a while everything is wrong. Plates that were a wall are a wet cloth. The sting, a curved idea. Predators that never considered a scorpion worth the risk learn to look for the soft big ones in hideouts they have come to memorize. The animal that wins as a brawler must think like a fugitive for a day, wedged deep under a log, face to the entrance, sting coiled across the only path in, the hours measured in heartbeats and the slow, tight ache of a shell hardening grain by grain. There is tenderness here too, in a form older than birdsong. When it is time to reproduce, the male approaches with raised pedipalps and a tail held high, not to menace but to telegraph intent. The dance that follows, the promenade à deux, looks like a slow argument between statues. The pair grips, releases, grips again, gliding in small circles while the male guides the female to a spot on the substrate he judges right. He places a spermatophore, a capsule of future, on stone, and persuades her to stand above it until it locks where it must. In modern scorpions, the female may carry tiny, pale versions of herself on her back until their first molt. It would be no surprise if in this wet world, this giant did the same, young bodies glowing faintly under moonlight the way scorpion cuticle does today, when a certain wavelength touches it, a mineral trick built into the skin itself. Rivals are fewer than you'd think at this size. A hungry amphibian larger than a man's arm may try its luck once. A juvenile fish-eater that wandered too far from the shallows may blink at the wrong moment and learn what pincers are for. The giant millipede is not prey but weather. The scorpion yields the trail and waits for the tremor to pass, patient as stone. Conflicts with others of its kind are short. A clash of pedipalps, a shove, an exchange of dry warning, with the sting held a fraction higher than usual. Territory here is a seam of good humidity, a tangle of roots that holds egg catches, a run between two waterholes where prey must cross. Violence wastes venom. Posture wastes almost nothing. Fossils keep their counsel and offer hints. A slate from what will be Scotland preserves impressions of plates and the pits where book lungs once opened. Measurements scaled from those plates make a map of a body nearly 2 feet long before the tail. Clues cluster, heavy pedipalp bases that mean strong closers, robust telson forms that mean a sting built not just to threaten but to deliver, trackways with paired dots like the stitches of a loom across mud, no belly drag, a tail trace that arcs gently when the animal turned. The rock wants to talk about geometry. The living animal was doing budgets, calories in, water out, risks amortized, shelter banked for a molting day. As the Carboniferous closes the tab on extravagance and oxygen slides toward modern values, the world becomes less kind to giants that breathe through pages and bear their skeleton on the outside. New hunters arrive with different compromises, synapsids that heat their own engines, reptiles that seal water in tighter, speed made of bone inside rather than armour outside. None of that undoes the scorpion's logic, it just prices it differently. Over deep time, lineages like Pulmonoscorpius narrow, shrink, redistribute their bets. The design persists, not at this scale, not with this swagger, but in night corners everywhere. Pedipalps ready, sting coiled. Book lungs tasting the air for rain. Stand in its world and the word psychopath falls off like burrs from a coat you wore into the wrong field. There is only a technician working a shift. The toolkit is specialised. Vibration readers, ground tasters, crushers, a hypodermic at the end of a rope of muscle. The job description is simple. Convert passing life into the energy to make more of yourself, while losing as little as possible to heat, chance, and competitors you never meet. The result looks like purpose because it is, not moral purpose, but the equilibrium point where physics, chemistry, and circumstance shake hands. You do not hear it leave. One moment there is a silhouette like a question mark tucked under a root. The next, an empty signature of pressed earth and the faint spice-bitter scent that scorpions leave without meaning to. Somewhere ahead, a reed quivers for a reason smaller than the breeze should allow. The tail rises not to threaten but to solve. The pedipalps set their angle, the feet find grip, and the forest, already thick with the business of living, opens a space for a quiet, exacting kind of death. Then even that edit is gone, and what remains is the cool, slow breathing of leaves and the sense that the ground has eyes. The water is the colour of brewed tea, and everything that enters it becomes a rumour. Leaves loosen from tree ferns and drift down like burned paper. Spores hang between surface and mud. Light breaks into stripes that never reach the bottom. On that bottom, a shape as wide as a shield and as patient as a stone adjusts itself by millimetres. If you were hovering, you'd mistake it for a buried pot lid, until the lid changed its mind and breathed. It is the animal that fooled us, christened with a name that means Great Spider, sold in museum labels and TV scripts as the nightmare webmaker of the Carboniferous, and then unmasked as something stranger, a broad, armoured Eurypterid with rake-like arms, more bulldozer than Black Widow, more trapdoor than tapestry. Its top is a single sweeping plate like a carpenter's plane, margin rounded, surface textured with tiny knobs that catch silt and break glare. The eyes sit far apart on that shield, 2 dark commas set into pale armour, each a colony of lenses that turn shimmer and vibration into a map. Beneath the forward rim, mouthparts hide in a cave of their own making. To either side, the first pair of limbs thickens into tools, not delicate spider legs but serrated rakes with combed edges built to sweep. The rest of the legs angle down and out short, blunt, better for walking the bottom than flying through water. There is no graceful oar stroke here, no high-speed pursuit. This is an animal that owns inches. It wins by moving sediment until food appears in the stirred world and then not letting that food go. The myth that grew around it was understandable. The holotype, flattened, enigmatic, offered a silhouette and a pattern of lines that once you saw spider, you could not easily unsee. Headlines multiplied, imaginations obliged. We pictured a hairy giant perched on fern columns, silk shining between trunks, amphibians cocooned like fruit. But stone is a persistent editor. Edges studied under light revealed cuticle ornament more like armoured swimmers than web spinners. The fangs were the front scythes of a very different lineage. Later, a more complete fossil taught the rest of the lesson. This was a bottom walker, a silt sculptor, a creature with combs instead of spinnerets. Heavy where spiders are tensile, deliberate where spiders are sprung. Watch it work. The broad body lowers into the soft bed until the dorsal plate is a suggestion under dust. A slow stroke with the forelimb combs lifts a smalt storm. Grains rise and tumble. Detritus shakes loose. In that snow globe, tiny crustaceans that had been invisible become outlines. Larval insects that spent the day pretending to be sticks betray themselves by trying to be better sticks. The next stroke is not for stirring but for sieving. Comb teeth meet comb teeth, forming a mesh that traps anything the size of a pea or smaller. The limb scissor inward, clearing the filter into the mouth's machinery. It is agriculture in reverse, the harvest of what chaos brings to the rake, performed by a creature that knows how to ask the mud the right questions. It can ambush too, and it does when a fish, slim, quick but careless, works too close. There is a sudden unburying, a push, a shove, and the animal's not built to chase in open water, but it does not have to. It turns the ground itself into a net by moving it. A quick burst, a corner made of 2 limbs and a body, a pinning sweep across a depression carved exactly for this purpose, and the fish is pressed to its own reflected skeek. The mouth parts get on with their quiet business. Then the plate sinks again, and the river remembers the previous sentence. Its tail is not a scorpion's sting, but a rudder, a counterweight, a punctuation mark at the end of the body that keeps the sentence straight. A twitch to the left and the shield yaws right, a lift and the whole machine eases over a root. The legs do not march so much as test. Each foot samples substrate, takes a step only if the ground answers with firmness, retreats if the answer is wrong. When it must turn, the front half draws a slow half circle and the back half follows a beat later, the whole animal describing a shape in silt you could trace with your finger. At night, the water cools and thickens. The world above goes glossy with moonlight. It does not matter. This hunter is a tactile one. Sensory hairs along limb edges read currents like braille. Pressure changes register as small, precise alarms. When a dragonfly cousin the size of a hawk dips to lay eggs in the film, ripples cross the surface and send a code through the column. The code says opportunity, but not yet. Eggs that make it down into the tangle of stems become part of the silt's language. Then the rake can read them. It waits. Waiting here is not passivity, it is the highest form of muscle memory. There is a day when it cannot be itself. The old cuticle has been honest for a year and will not forgive another. Under a root tangle where currents slow to thoughtful, the seam opens. A paler body, new and a little too clean, slides out from the old shell with the careful disrespect of a hand leaving a glove. Everything that had been shield and scissor is now soft and vulnerable. It folds itself as small as something this wide can manage and lets chemistry harden what will harden. The river carries smells away, but not all of them. Fishes cruise nearer than they would on any other night. A smaller Eurypterid with a thinner plate edges in, uncertain whether it has permission to gamble. If the big one survives this, it will be because it chose place and time better than its neighbours, and because the new armour became real before the wrong mouth found it. We imagine it's lovers because stone will not show us. The living relatives that made it into the present give us a hint. A grappling quiet, a measured push-pull across the bottom, until the ground beneath seems the right temperature, the right grain. A package placed, an agreement made without eyes for ceremony, only for contact. Eggs settle into silt, into the seam between root and stone, and the best guardianship this animal can offer is architectural. Pick a corner where the current forgets to look, where what prowls has to announce its arrival by moving mud in a way even a distracted parent would notice. The world around it is not empty of threats. Armoured amphibians patrol the margins with slow strength, small sharks puncture the shallower pools on flood days, other Eurypterids with different tools but similar agendas, right intersecting paths across the map. But this wide thing is hard to get a bite on. Its edges are all plate, its middle is all stubborn. Mouths that can handle fish scales balk at a dinner shaped like a serving tray that kicks. The best defence in a place like this is to be low and inconvenient to lift. It has made a career out of being no one's favourite problem. What we thought it was matters because the mistake changed the stories we told about the forest. For years, people pictured vast curtains of silk and monsters clambering through them, a horror born from multiplying a familiar fear. The real animal is not less frightening when you learn it. It frightens in the way a hidden machine does, a device under the floor that reaches up through slats and rearranges the inventory. It is a predator that kills by editing the substrate. Rake, collect, bury, then become a wall. Let the impatient bump into you and regret it. Trace fossils, trackways pressed into what used to be the bottoms of shallow pools, record it more honestly than any newspaper ever did. Parallel staggered dots, each from a short leg setting down, an occasional shallow stripe where the tail dragged as it pivoted, a raised lip of silt to one side where the rake swept outward and piled sediment like ploughed snow. In some slabs, the track stops short of a ripple mark and then resumes on the other side. As if the animal had tested the surface, decided it was a film too thin to carry weight, and chosen to go around. That's the thing. Even the absence of prints is information, if you know the grammar. It lived in places where water came and went with moods, backwaters of rivers, floodplains that made surprise ponds after long rain, oxbows that warmed and grew sour when the channels retreated. In those bowls, a bottom walker with the patience of a fisherman had a future. It found more life in stillness than most creatures find in running water. On some days, it owned a circle no wider than a room, and that circle fed it until the weather changed. When we look for it in our language now, the name still holds the echo of the first mistake. Megarachne, the great spider that wasn't. Even stripped of silk and eight-legged malice, the animal wears the title like a borrowed coat that fits better than you'd think. The bigness is true, the spiderness has been exchanged for something older and more architectural. If you need drama, the truth supplies its own. A hidden plate's slow rise, a rake that turns from broom to trap, a fish stitched to the ground by pressure and care. No drip of venom, no web glistening, just engineering and patience, and the kind of violence that never lifts its voice. Imagine standing calf-deep in that tea-brown pool feeling silt sluice around your shins. Nothing moves. Then the silt changes its mind. A curve lifts, just a few millimeters, the way a breath lifts a blanket. A line appears in the dust like the first pencil stroke in a sketch. A forelimb slides out, comb teeth glossy, and draws the world toward a mouth you cannot see. The water makes no comment. The leaves continue their slow, formal descent. You step back without deciding to. The surface calms, the line erases itself, and for a moment you believe you imagined it. But the bottom knows the truth, and so does the animal underneath. It was never a spider. It never needed to be. It was and is exactly the thing that the mud, the light, and the math created for this room of water. An artisan of silt that once fooled our eyes and still refuses to apologize. If you listen closely, you can still hear them, faint echoes stitched into the world around us. A modern dragonfly needles the air over a pond at dusk, and for a heartbeat the Carboniferous returns, a whisper of wings that once spanned a child's arm, a shadow that meant trouble for anything small enough to be held in spiny legs. A millipede curls under a log, and the forest briefly remembers a living rampart that turned leaf beds into roads. In tea-brown water, a horseshoe crab rows past, and you can almost see the broad shields of ancient rakes waking the mud. Our planet keeps its memories. You just have to know how to read them. We called them psychopaths because they killed without our reasons, but that says more about us than about them. There is no malice in a hydraulic jaw or a serrated pincer. There is only physics, chemistry, and an atmosphere rich enough to bankroll outrageous designs. Higher oxygen thickened the breath of the world and made room for bodies that today feel like hoaxes. A hawk-sized griffin fly that hunted on vortices. A living coffee table of armour and legs that turned detritus into soil. A river floor oarsman that made a trap out of the ground. A land scorpion reading vibrations like sheet music. A bottom walker that sifted silt until meals revealed themselves. Efficiency looks like cruelty when you're the thing being measured. What's striking is how much of their blueprint survives. 4 wings working in counterpoint. Armour that is both wall and hinge. Mouthparts that don't chew so much as negotiate matter into energy. Book lungs fanning humid air into blood. Tracheal tubes delivering oxygen without a single breath drawn. Even their life rhythms persist. The peril and rebirth of a molt. The careful placing of eggs where water and time will conspire to help the hush of a successful ambush that barely disturbs the scene. Scale changed. Strategy didn't. When the atmosphere tightened its budget, evolution didn't rip up the plan, it resized it. And then there are the receipts. Stone pages pressed with wings like leaded glass. Trackways marching across ancient mud with the tidy cadence of machine stitching. A single pincer the size of a forearm, its tooth wear telling you what it gripped and how hard. Thorax plates roared enough to be mistaken for shields from a war that never had humans in it. Fossils don't romanticize. They don't lie. They show you geometry and invite you to imagine the muscle that moved inside it. If you've ever stood before a slab of shale and felt your skin prickle, that was recognition. Something powerful once passed here and left its shape behind. Maybe the strangest part of travelling backward is what it does to your sense of danger. We expect the monsters to roar. These didn't need to. The dragonfly killed with quiet math. The millipede dominated by reusing to hurry. The sea scorpion edited its world with paddles and patience. The land scorpion solved problems through the soles of its feet. The giant spider that wasn't turned mud into a mechanism. None of them asked permission, none of them apologized. They simply did the one thing the world paid them to do over and over until the ledger changed. And the ledger always changes. Oxygen falls, climates tilt, rivers rewire. Teeth show up in new arrangements. The giant versions go first because giants are expensive. What remains are the echoes. Scaled-down assassins scribbling zigzags over ponds. Shy detritivores turning forests from the bottom up. Small scorpions writing Morse code across the ground with their feet. Armoured bottom walkers you'd never notice unless you were looking for a REPL that isn't current. When you see them, you're not watching survivors so much as continuations, sentences evolution kept writing in a smaller font. If the word psychopathic still itches, try this instead. Necessary. Necessary for turning biomass into motion. Necessary for keeping systems honest. Necessary for transforming dead forests into future soil and the living into the next living. We inherit the results of their work every time we breathe air the colourless factories of a coal forest made, every time we look at a landscape patterned by those old bargains between armour and hunger, between patience and speed, and then turn the camera around for a moment. Imagine a future mind reading our signatures back through time, our cities splayed like mineral reefs, our roads pressed into the crust like the trackways of a creature with too many wheels, our tools fossilising into oars with stories attached. What will they call us? Gentle? Efficient? Psychopathic? Or simply inevitable, given the chemistry and the rules of the room we walked into? The labels we throw at the past tend to boomerang. So when you step outside after this and a dragonfly hovers in your personal sky, give it a second look. That's not just an insect, it's a living footnote to a chapter when buggles were the apex problem you didn't want to have. When you turn a log and 100 tiny legs negotiate the sudden light, you're watching an ancient thesis on stability rehearse itself. When you stand by a slow river and feel a pressure wave kiss your shins for no clear reason, consider the possibility that the bottom is still a workplace and that someone down there remembers the old trade. Deep time is not dead time. It hums under everything. It's in the way a wing scissoring the air writes vortices the same way it did 320 million years ago. It's in the way armour compromises with flexibility and wins by losing just enough. It's in the way life, when cornered by climate or chemistry, finds a new size for the same idea. Our nightmares about the past are really just ore wearing a mask. Pull the mask off, and you're left with craft. If this journey into the planet's older operating systems stirred something in you, carry it to the next puddle you pass, the next patch of leaf litter you disturb, the next night you spend listening to the ground breathe. Tell me which ancient bug you'd least want to meet in a dark swamp, or which one you'd choose to be for a day if the oxygen would have you. And if you want to keep walking these long corridors through time with me, through forests that used to be oceans and oceans that used to be stone, stick around. There are more doors to open. Until then, let the small things around you stand a little taller. They have ancestors that were giants and a pedigree of problem solving that once ruled the sky, the soil and the water. They're not monsters, they're reminders, and they're everywhere, waiting for you to notice.